quickly. Well, thanks for coming to another one of these sessions. It's a summer. Thank you for being here. We're very glad, George, you've joined us today. Okay, Matthew 25 says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Matthew 25 reminds us, and Jesus calls us to serve with and for the least of these, not as a group to be pitied, but as people who are deeply loved. We aim to help to multiply this loving commitment to radical and fearless discipleship. Following Jesus faithfully means putting love and compassion into action. And so we welcome George Eklund. He's the Director of Education and Advocacy for the Coalition for the Homeless. Now tell me if I'm wrong on any of this. Grew up in Moorhead, Kentucky, attended Western Kentucky University. Upon graduating, he moved to Louisville, where he spent 3 years doing community organizing for the Network Center for Community Change, which is NC3. Following his tenure with NC3, he spent 4 years traveling, consulting with nonprofits, and biking across the country to raise money for affordable housing. George returned to Louisville in 2016 to work with the ACLU of Kentucky and earn a master's in public administration. The Coalition for the Homeless has had over 30 member agencies serving the needs of people experiencing homelessness by providing housing, food, clothing, health care, legal services, and more to thousands of Louisvillians each year. George brings a depth and breadth of knowledge of these challenges facing those who lack a stable, accessible, and affordable housing situation, and seeks to create community solutions as well as advocate before local, state, and federal officials and lawmakers for those in need. So here we are, ready to learn and discuss the realities of our people, of God's people. It won't be easy, but it's what we're called to do. So let's open with prayer, and then I'll give it over to George. Let us pray. God of the oppressed, your call to follow is difficult. You call us to reorder our lives as expressed in Scripture. Hearing this and knowing this, we still pass by the ones you especially notice. People who are poor, hungry, experiencing homelessness, sick, or imprisoned. We have not stood with those who are hated, bullied, and excluded. Comfortable with the way things are, we are too complacent, even complicit with injustice and prejudice. Forgive us, O God. Stir in us the desire to work for change. Open our hearts so that all may have a place at the table. Amen. George, take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. So this is me making up to you all. I was supposed to come and talk to you all in January, but my wife had a wicked, nasty case of mastitis, and so I just couldn't come. So I apologize, but I'm here now. So I work with the Coalition for the Homeless. Has everybody heard of the Coalition in some shape or form, or are aware that it exists? So we are a 30-year-old organization. We act as an umbrella agency. We're really facilitators. We started after a couple of people died on the street in the 80s. As part of the Archdiocese and the city of Louisville, they got together and said, we need some sort of umbrella agency, and the Coalition was born. So we work to address homelessness through coordination, through advocacy, and through community education. So coordination is just making sure that all the shelters, all of the members are kind of moving in the same direction, making sure that we are in the same boat, trying to get to the same vision of where we want the city to be. And a lot of that is through a database that we manage. We manage a coordinated shelter access network where people can call us 24 hours a day, or not 24 hours a day, but every day of the week to secure a spot to be in shelter. And there's some other logistical things that we do. We write a big grant to HUD, and that brings in a lot of money that funds homeless services here. So that's one thing. Advocacy is me going down to Metro Council or over to Frankfurt just to talk about issues that we're working on. Right now we're working on a way to expunge evictions off of people's records. We're working on getting better access to IDs, photo IDs, and getting more affordable housing in the mix. Those are our big rocks right now. And then the other thing is community education. So if we're not going out into community and meeting people, expanding our network, increasing the just the education level about these issues, like there's a vacuum, there's a void, and like it's our role to go out proactively and just like this, going and talking about homelessness and housing insecurity, and connecting it to like the bigger picture here, because it's more than just somebody on the corner at the expressway. It's really, I argue that it is a systemic issue that is in every part of the city, and we'll kind of get to that. So if we can go to the next slide. All right, so I believe that housing is a human right. I believe that every person deserves a safe, affordable place to call home. And I came to this realizing how crucial housing is at a pretty early age. So April 1st, 1996. Is anybody a UK fan here? Okay. Does anybody remember what happened April 1st, 1996? So I'll get to this. I was in 4th grade, and a fellow student of mine invited me to his birthday party. His name was Billy Brown, and I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. I grew up in Moorhead, and I was like, okay, great, birthday party. They're always fun. So I bought a present. I got in the car with my dad. We drove through like Daniel Boone National Forest. It's Appalachia. It is hills, it is forests, it is poverty, it is trailers, it is community, it is church. That's what Appalachia is to me. And so I arrived at his house, and it quickly became apparent that I was the only kid that showed up. Because April 1st, 1996, the UK Wildcats were playing Syracuse in the national championship. And it was the first time that we won the national championship in a while, and it was a big deal. So I had a great time at his party. You know, it was a single wide trailer, pre-1976, like it needed to be condemned. I remember like family pictures on old wood paneling that you would see in like your grandparents' den. I remember like that faux shag carpet that was really just, who knows what was in it. And it was an intergenerational family. Household where grandma was there, uncles were there, a couple cousins might have been staying there, and I just had this like, it's one of these crucible moments that I've always carried with me, to be like going into Billy's room and realizing like he didn't have a desk. He shared it with his 2 brothers, and it was very much like, where does Billy do his homework? Where does Billy actually get to have time to himself? And like, what kind of success is Billy gonna have without that? And I looked at myself and saying like, I didn't have to share a room. I had a desk to do my homework. I had books in my room. I had more than enough room. And it's just kind of always hung with me of like, what is my role in addressing housing and homelessness? What is my role in trying to help support families and people like Billy, just to like determine what they want their future to be, not let their circumstances determine what it's going to be. And so that's kind of why I got into housing and homelessness. I mean, that's really why I care about this issue, is just because of moments like that with Billy. So if we can go to the next slide. Has anybody ever played the very famous game called musical chairs? Okay. Housing, for a lot of people, is a game of musical chairs, where you have 15 people out playing in the game, and you have 10 chairs. And when the music stops, some people don't have a chair, some people don't get a house. And this is roughly how it breaks down, of like, people end up homeless because of loss of a job. People end up homeless because of abuse at the home. They're evicted by a family member. They have some sort of disability, be it like a physical disability, it could be severe mental illness, it could be anything, but all of these obstacles really result in that person not being able to afford a spot, not being able to get to it fast enough. And it's just a matter of like, who is left standing is the ones that end up housing insecure and homeless. All of these issues exist in every zip code in Louisville. So people lose their job all the time. people have severe mental illness, people suffer from substance use disorder in every zip code. The determining factor is, do they have the resources to navigate through those things? People that end up sleeping out have exhausted all those resources. And they don't have the funds to actually navigate those tribulations that come up. So, are there any questions about this? Okay. I forgot to say my 2 rules when I give presentations. One, if I use an acronym, and I'm going to try not to, but I'm full of them. If I use one and you're like, what does that mean? Just throw up your arm and just ask, hey, what does SMI mean? Or what does COC mean? And I'll explain it. The other thing is, like, and it might not be an issue, I'm generally a pretty soft-spoken person, so if you need me to speak up louder, like, just raise your hand or just kind of raise the roof, and I'll speak into the microphone a little more. So yeah, across Kentucky, there's about 4,000 people that experience homelessness every night, and that is across the state. That's not just Louisville. And think about that as what might be happening tonight. It is not the total story of it. And we'll go to the next slide and I'll kind of talk about the different types of homelessness. So there's a continuum of homelessness where it ranges from people sleeping out at the bus station, under a bridge, they're camping, to somebody who's doubling up with a family member. They might be sleeping in their car. They might be sleeping in a library. Like, the full spectrum of people that are homeless, we see the tip of the iceberg of camps. The bigger issue is that a lot of people are doubling up. A lot of people are just kind of couch surfing and trying to survive every night. They might be in an extended stay one week. They might be with a family member. They might be in their car. They're constantly moving and surviving. And that's really, it kind of inhibits us to really be able to tell the full picture of who is homeless and what's going on. Because a lot of people that are homeless actually have jobs, they go to work every day. It's just the fact that they don't have an address to call their own. So we can go to the next slide.
Question, we had a question.
Oh, yeah.
And in that circle you were talking about, there are children.
Absolutely, yeah. So 2 things that I want to pull up, and I'll speak to it a little bit, but every year there's 5,000 JCPS students that experience homelessness. And that's not necessarily 5,000 students sleeping on the street, but we got evicted, and I'm going to stay with my mom, you're going to go stay with your aunt, and it's just displacement. It's just disrupting that education cycle, yeah. And then there's a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds that are homeless. Thank you for highlighting that. And we can, I'm going to make sure all these slides get out to you. This is more of like a technical definition, but we'll keep on moving. But there's chronic homelessness, there's episodic homelessness, there's provisionally occupied, there's transitional homelessness. These are just kind of more technical, like HUD definitions of what homelessness is. When we see chronic, we think people on the street. Oh, housing and urban development is what HUD is. So the housing and urban development has these definitions. So chronic is on the street. Episodic is I got evicted, I was homeless for a couple weeks or a month, and then I was able to get into a spot. And then transitional is usually like going through some sort of transition point in your life and trying to get back into housing quickly. So, and we can go to the next slide. So demographic-wise, in Kentucky, or in Louisville, there were 10,640 people that accessed homeless services, and specifically shelter, transitional housing, outreach services, common assessment, support services, and 5,844 were for shelter. So remember how I said 4,000 people every night could be experiencing homelessness across Kentucky? Think about that as like, is it going to rain today? We don't know how much it's going to rain. It might rain an inch, it might rain 5 inches. This is more of how many raindrops we get each year. So that might be, in this case, it's 10,000 times it rains on somebody. 8,300 of those people were individuals. About 2,000 were families. 300 we documented were children. 700 were veterans there. 10,000 were fleeing domestic violence. And 144 were parents, were parenting, but they were still under 25, so like super young parents that were homeless. We can go to the next slide. And this is a breakdown of race. So Louisville is about 12% black, but half of our homeless population is black. It is disproportionately black, and minorities end up homeless. And that's just because of other things I'll get into here shortly. Before I move on, are there any questions, comments, reactions to this? Honestly, I think it's much more complex than poor choices. For me, they're not giving any good options. Can we come back to your question? I do want to document it, but there's other things I want to kind of pull up through the presentation. But I want to come back to this theme of, is it a choice or is it not? So, is that okay with you? Okay. All right. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Oh, this is... So, for us, housing is what ends homelessness. Right now, we need roughly 31,000 units of affordable housing, affordable rental for those that earn minimum wage. And that's minimum wage is $7 and a quarter an hour right now. So that's what we need here in Louisville, just 31,000 units. We don't have enough options for people to get into. So again, the musical chairs option, this is adding more chairs to that game. And this is just right now, 1 in 4 Kentuckians are paying more than 30% of their gross monthly income on housing. So back to HUD and our definition of what affordable housing is. Housing and urban development. There's an old formula from the 1930s that you should be paying 1/3 of your gross monthly income on rent, you should be paying 1/3 of your gross monthly income on housing, or on food, and then the rest should be on just your everyday needs. Right now we have too many people spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and more than 50, a lot of people are spending more than 50%. And I have an example kind of to walk through with you all too. So, and we can go to the next slide. Eviction is a huge issue here in Louisville. It's probably the biggest cause of homelessness and housing insecurity. We have an eviction rate that's twice the national average. So roughly before COVID, 17,000 people had an eviction filed on them each year. And about half of them got a judgment against them, half of them were responsible and either moved or they paid the rent and got it dismissed. Somehow they got it dismissed. Black Kentuckians are 2.5 times more likely to be evicted compared to their white counterparts. And right now, really pre-COVID, we had about 14 set-outs each day. There's a ton of emergency rental assistance that came into the system, so we're kind of waiting to see what the numbers are going to do in the next couple of years.
What is a set-out?
A set-out, thank you. So a set-out is the end of an eviction. So you get an eviction filed, you go to court, the judge orders the eviction, and then the landlord applies for what's called a warranty of possession. And then that's when they schedule a time for the sheriff to come and keep the peace. The landlord hires a team to come and physically remove your belongings and put it on the curb. And so that's the end of it. So that 14 times a day, pre-COVID, people were going through the actual experience of having their stuff handled by strangers and put out on the curb. Yeah. Okay. I think it's laws. I think it is. We don't have a lot of laws or regulations that dictate when people can get evicted, or when they can't get evicted. There's not too many tenant protections, and I think the other thing is like low income wise, we don't make as much as other states. So I think it's economics, but I think it's also a legal issue too. That's a good question.
What are we talking about time-wise?
There's a couple variables, but the fastest you could do it is probably a month and a half if everything goes very quickly. It could be a month and a half to 2.5 months, depending on the court flow. Or how many cases are in court.
And what's in place to possibly help them pay back rent?
Before COVID, nothing. So the area community ministries, they can patch stuff together. The neighborhood places, they can help, but it's very much, it's not enough. So if rent is $800 a month, neighborhood place can say like, oh, we can give you $400, but we want to make sure that you have a job, and we need to verify that you're making below the threshold, and we need to make sure that you go to a budgeting class. And there's just a lot of hoops that they make people jump through. And so yeah, if a home renter gets behind like $800 a month, or $1,600, like chances are they're not going to be able to catch that up. With COVID money, like we've had more money than we've ever had. So we've been able to see a huge decrease in the number of people that get a judgment just because there's tens of millions of dollars to pay for back rent. But before COVID, there wasn't anything. I saw somebody else's hand pop up. Okay. All right. This is what I work on every day, is eviction and policy around evictions. This is where evictions happen. Darker is a higher rate, lighter is less of a rate. And like I said to Susan before, like I love maps, and I like to put them in here. So, and we can go to the next slide. So, this is just a snapshot of what our housing looks like right now. So home renters, 36% of Jefferson County residents of Louisvillians, they rent. 60 of that population, 63% of that or 63 of black households are renters, same as 62 with Hispanic and Latino households. 46%, so almost half of our renting population is cost burdened. And so that is people spending more than 30% of their gross monthly income on rent. And we can go to the next slide. This is just home ownership disparity. So Louisville has Kentucky has a fairly high home ownership rate, but only 38% of black families are able to own their home, versus something like 68, 70% of white families own their homes. So it's almost like an inversion there. So this is just a scenario that I like to put out to highlight how hard it is to rent. So does anybody rent in here? Yeah. So I have a theory that once you buy that home, you stop looking at what rents are in a community. Like you just kind of forget, like, oh, like it's not $400 anymore. It's actually like $800. So this is a scenario that I just want to highlight of like, this is a single family or single-headed family. Could be a mom, it could be a dad, and they're bringing home about $2,500 a month. Right. So this is working 55 hours a week. So you get a little bit of overtime that you can maybe count on, or maybe you're working a second job at $10 an hour, and you need a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. And so I just kind of zeroed in on the Anchorage area just to see what's out there. And our rents right now are, so we got a 2-bedroom, Pets Love Us and You Will Too, for $1,209 a month. A Home You Can Love for $1,400 a month for 3 bedrooms, 1,300 square feet. Once Upon a Time, we have 1,200, 2 bedrooms, about 1,000 square feet. So when thinking about this, your take home is, you're making $2,500 a month, but your take home is $1,990 after taxes. And a lot of these would not work for this family. So like if somebody was working at the Walmart or at one of the retail stores at the mall, like they would have to go look somewhere else. Like, and for me, I believe people should choose where they want to be based on where they go to church, where their kids go to school, where their family lives, and it should, like, zip code shouldn't, or the price should determine what kind of house you get in. It shouldn't determine like what part of town you're kind of like pushed towards. So yeah, I've just brought a lot of like very like, yes, I'm sorry.
Just to add to what you said, even if you're not looking in Anchorage, the $1,200 for 2-bed, 1-bath, I have seen that in Shively in a trailer park.
Yeah.
So you're still getting 2-bed, 1-bath in Shively in a trailer park. And a lot of those are not well taken care of because the management doesn't care. And I'm speaking from personal experience because of how many doors I've knocked on for evictions. Yeah. So the same price as you would pay to live in Anchorage in a much nicer space, but a lot less taken care of. It's the same price.
Yeah.
So even if, regardless of where people want to live, the choices that they have are still limited.
Yeah. So after we've kind of taken in all this kind of like state of where we're at right now, I want to just popcorn around of like, why should we care about housing as an issue? I mean, you know my views, but I kind of want to hear like, you all have, this is the 3rd time somebody's come to present to you all about housing, so I kind of want to hear like, why do you care? Why should we care about this issue?
Outcomes for children, for families, are always better when there's stable housing.
Yeah. So outcomes for families, children, just general like well-being. Yeah.
And because so many other elements of a person's life, I feel like hinge on their housing.
Yeah.
It relates to your educational opportunities, your healthcare opportunities, your access to transportation.
To me, it's housing is like the fundamental place to start
Yeah.
if you're looking at, social concerns.
Yeah.
Safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So safety, yeah, like being outside and vulnerable is not, it's not good for the mind, it's not good for the body, it's hard. Yeah. I'm gonna stand over here. I like this angle. Are there any others? We can go to the next slide then. Oh, you already did. Can you go back one? I'm sorry. So yeah, people deserve housing, workforce well-being. Like if you don't have a place to get ready for a job interview, like, are you going to get the job? Having secure like housing that's connected close to a job. I know people that take the TARC hour-and-a-half from like where I live to come work out at St. Matthew's Mall. Child well-being, health of the city, just wealth creation. So having housing as an option to generate generational wealth. and yeah, just the overall health of the city. Like if we're diverting all these issues, all of like emergency services going to a camp, if we're diverting healthcare resources to deal with chronically homeless people, like it's dragging other parts of like what we could do together as a city down. So, and we can go to the next. So I mean, these are really bad numbers, but for us, I mean, I think that and we'll kind of go through a couple highlights. We didn't get here overnight. There was a lot of like poor, misguided decisions that were made for about the last 80 years. And I'm going to touch on a couple that you all may have been around for, you may remember, but we're still living with the ramifications of a lot of this. So we can go to the first slide. Homelessness has always been an issue. We used to have Hoover towns where thousands of people would camp wherever they could. And the FDR passed the Federal Housing Act, and this created what we use today to gain access to homeownership. It created the 30-year amortizing loan structure. And that was a really great tool to lift hundreds of people out of poverty and get access to housing in like a way that people could afford. The bad part of that act was it gave us the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Has anybody heard of the Homeowners Loan Corporation? Okay, so this gave us the redlining maps. Okay, and this was just guidelines that the federal government kind of supported to say, this is where you should invest money, this is where you shouldn't. So areas that were redlined were deemed as like not a safe investment for your money. And anybody who wanted to get home ownership in those areas had to go onto the secondary market, which is pretty predatory, where you would do a loan before they had FHA of like a huge balloon payment where you spend 30 grand down, you pay on it for 10 years, and you have to come up with another 30 grand. So that was one thing that we did that I think is pretty wrong, and we're still living with today. We can go to the next slide. The second thing that we did wrong was how we administered the GI Bill. So the GI Bill was it was a phenomenal program. It created a whole lot of housing in the country. Members of our armed services went abroad, they did their service, they came back, and they should be compensated for that. One of the big benefits was access to a federally backed mortgage. Unfortunately, like if you were a black service member, you were pretty much locked out of that program. So in my family's experience, like my grandfather, he got a house on Long Island. It was part of it was a Levittown like development where he had a federally backed mortgage through the GI Bill, and he was able to house his family, and they all went on to get advanced degrees. They were all able to, one's a judge, my dad's a professor. They were able to have like a really stable childhood because of that. Like in the same area, New York area, in 1 year, 67,000 black service members applied, 100 were given that loan, that benefit. So it locked an entire generation out of home ownership. The other thing that we did for a long time was we added restrictive covenants on deeds. Does anybody know what this is? So we had racially restrictive covenants where on deeds you would have prescribed language of like, you cannot sell this house to a black person, you cannot sell it to anybody from the Middle East, you cannot sell it to any Jew. Like that's what they would say. And that was ended in when Shelby versus Kramer was decided. It was a Supreme Court case out of St. Louis, and they just said racially restrictive covenants are unconstitutional. You can't do that. And so, but we still live with those ramifications. If you look at deeds today, you can still find them on there. There was an advocate named Susie Post who, when she bought her house, she refused to close. She's like, no, I want this wiped off, because she wanted to make a statement at the time.
George, can I add something?
Yeah.
Knox Presbyterian Church in Cincinnati has that in their deed for the church property. When it was purchased, it was said, this property shall not be sold to black people.
Yeah. It's still here. It lingers. The other thing that was decided was that we stopped funding housing and urban development in the 70s. So HUD in the 70s, so I'm going to speak in today's dollars, or really like 2019 dollars. So in the 1970s, we were spending about $500 billion on HUD. So this was building housing for low-income people. We started cutting that pretty aggressively. And so in 2019, like, we were spending more money on the home interest tax deduction than we were on housing and urban development. So like in 2017, we spent about like $76 billion on the tax deduction. We spent $50 billion on HUD. So we were subsidizing people owning their homes, whereas we kind of stopped supporting people to low-income people that were just trying to get housing. And we can go to the next slide. And the other thing that started happening is that we really started closing and deinstitutionalizing. And we released a lot of people from places such as Central State with not enough supports and not enough like plans. It was just kind of like, well, we're just going to deinstitutionalize people and they'll figure it out themselves. Like, we needed a much more strategic plan to do that, with more supports and different kinds of options for people to land. And that was really the creation of modern homelessness that we've had today, since then. There are other things that happened, but the thing that we're dealing with today most is the Great Recession. So we had a huge number of foreclosures that came through. We had 2.3 million homes in 2008 were foreclosed on. This allowed a lot of large corporations to move into the market and buy it up. So Blackstone, which is the largest single-family landlord in the country, bought like $10 billion worth of assets overnight. And this, I mean, I'm not going to criticize landlords because they're part of the market, they're providing a service, but it's locking a lot of people out from that home ownership option and to gain that wealth. So it's centralizing a lot of the housing into one entity. The other thing that happened is that we stopped building houses. So in 2006, we had something like 2 million housing starts. In 2009, it had dropped down to like half a million housing starts. And we haven't recovered from that. We lost a lot of builders, and so that's why we see housing prices go up so much right now, is because we don't have enough inventory on the market. We can go to the next slide. This is for me, this explains a lot of our housing issues right now. So you see, this is just a timeline. We have 4 lines here that I want to highlight. The top line is single family. That middle line is multifamily, and the bottom 2 lines are also multifamily, but significantly bigger, or like bigger units, bigger complexes. These are housing starts by year since 75. So we see where we were in 2005, that huge spike where all we were building was single family. And since then, we have not recovered to that level. And it's not like we can fix it like immediately. It's like we need sustained like new development on housing. The other struggle is that with our housing market right now, our average square footage has increased. So we went from about 1,000 square feet in the 60s and 70s to like 2,300 square feet now. And that's just upping the price. It's upping, like, we're not building single, like, entry-level homes. We're just buying like homes that would be great for like that second or third time that you're buying. And we'll go to the next slide here. So this is something I want you all to really kind of think about. This is the housing continuum. So you can see in the left-hand side, is homeless. And you go all the way to the right to that kind of purple color, that's market home ownership. And all of those lines, and when you look at it, and I can drop off printed versions of this presentation for next Sunday if people want to take a look at it. There are things that'll get you there, and then there are things that'll get you back. So, like, you completing your education, you move from subsidized rental to affordable rental, or you gain more stability, you improve your employment, that kind of moves you up, that continuum. But other things can take you back. So like eviction is a huge thing that will displace people and kind of throw them off this continuum where they can go from, I kid you not, there is a woman who I met last Sunday who was a homeowner. She lost her house because of back taxes, and she's staying in Salvation Army now. Like, people will come, like, something happens. It always happens. So what we're trying to do is really address, like, the pitfalls that push people back into homelessness so that they can be able to get those opportunities to move up in the housing continuum. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts?
How's Louisville doing in the affordable housing? I see a lot of building going on. Are we also investing into it? That's the question.
No. Like I said, we need about 30,000 units for those that earn the very least. We need 20 that earn like that second quintile. But we'll kind of get on this, like there's not a lot of investment in like affordable housing for those that earn the least. Like, if I had my way, I would just flood the market with housing options and just to help drive down the price for everybody. But focusing on that 30,000 unit, because everybody who is looking in that range of very low income, there's just not a lot out there, and what's there some have housing condition issues, some have it's just, people are often given the choice of I can stay in my car or I can move into a place that has rats and a hole in the roof. Those are the options that they're given a lot of times with that very low income. So if I had my way, I would surge resources into building more housing options.
You mentioned this number before, but the occupancy, did you say it's like 97%?
Yeah.
I don't remember what the term
So,
is, but you know what it is.
Yeah, I talked with J.D. Carey. He's with the Louisville Apartments Association, and we have a good working relationship with them. But he highlighted our rental occupancy in Louisville right now is like 97%. So everybody's competing for like a very few number of units, and that's keeping the price pretty high. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much, he's the industry rep, so that's pretty much the whole market right now. I don't know what it is like based on like income or like price point, so.
I went house hunting with, now I shouldn't yell. I went house hunting with someone 8 months ago, apartment hunting, and was struck by it, and it depends on the day what your rent will be. If they only have one apartment, the rent is high. The next day, that rent could drop $100. There are two things. If you just go to a website and try to find an apartment, say, east of I-65, the big threshold is always, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And you have to be honest with that box. And the other one, have you ever been evicted? And so if you talk about two things that automatically put you to the bottom of the list, even if you can afford the apartment, and the only reason why this particular person, has an apartment right now, is because I was willing to be a guarantor, and it is not a happy time.
It's a lot. So we can go to the next slide here. So solutions, I usually compare it to a puzzle. Like, we need every piece of the puzzle to paint the picture that we want. So, like, big issues that I'm working on is, like, we need some sort of land development code reform, because the code and the process to get developments online is too strict, and developers are just saying, enough with Jefferson County, I'm going to go to Bullitt, I'm going to go to Shelby, I'm going to go to Indiana, because it's easier to develop there. Getting more fair housing, so addressing, like, past criminal convictions. Like, there's a new expansion of fair housing to where you cannot be barred housing based on certain convictions. Not every conviction, but there are low-level offenses that people cannot be barred housing on. Set-out reform, eviction reform, fund housing development, just getting more affordable housing on the market. Rethinking affordable home ownership. So if you have a house in West End, Louisville, that's worth, we'll say, $60,000, and you wrote a 30-year mortgage for a home renter, like, their rent every month would be like $300 if they're paying on the mortgage, versus like what they're paying right now, which is probably $8 or $9. It would just be a huge way to, like, let families have that asset so that they can start thriving and not just be living paycheck to paycheck and hoping that the transmission doesn't go out. Utilities, energy efficiency, any kind of tax lien sale, like, all these pieces will help support families and address housing and homelessness. So, and we can go to the next one. No, it's illegal. Yeah, KRS like 83 dot something 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 says we can't have rent control. Yeah. So here are some ways to help. I would suggest working with shelters and organizations doing the work. So there's a spectrum of people that do this professionally, that go in every day, but there's a huge number of people that it is a passion project. It is their, like, life's mission, where they just volunteer and go out. I would find, and there may be some that are Presbyterian oriented that are doing stuff, and just partner with them and get them the resources that they need through, like, a mutual aid lens or through supporting housing programs. You can always use human-centered language, so rather than saying, well, that's just a beggar or a homeless person, just really focus on people's humanity. Just saying, like, I don't care if it's unhoused or homeless, like, whichever term you feel comfortable with. As long as you focus, like, hey, that person is a member of the community, they're our neighbor, they are a Louisvillian. I think that's the big thing I focus on, is, like, a person experiencing a person, like, they are a person still. Acknowledge people's humanity when they're panhandling. You can give, you don't have to give, it's a donation, but if the least that you can do is just throw a quick, like, wave as you're driving, just to say, hey, like, I don't have anything, or I'm choosing not to give, but at least, how do you do? Yeah, and it can just be as you're just driving by. And then advocate for affordable housing through, like, the land development code reform, affordable housing trust fund, and then when developments are proposed, like, proactively ask council members to support it. So regardless of the zip code, I'm just saying, like, we actually need rentals and affordable rentals in all parts of the county. Please don't show up to camps with your stuff. Like, I know that people will go through and say, like, I'm not using this, I want to repurpose it, I want to, like, let somebody else reuse it, and that's good, and I want to support that. Just don't show up with a box of your Goodwill stuff to a camp, and here's why. 2 reasons. One is when you're cleaning out when you're doing your spring cleaning, it's like, well, I don't need these sweatshirts, I'm just going to give them to that camp down the street. And the next month is in spring, so the next 4 months are going to be hot, and it's going to be like today, where we don't need sweatshirts. The second thing is that people don't have a place to store this stuff, so once it rains, it becomes trash, and it'll never get dry. And so it's easier to say, work with that mutual aid organization, or go to a Goodwill or any kind of other, like, thrift shop, just to give it there, because agencies use that money to fund their programming, but it's also will get to people if they absolutely need it through that venue. I've just heard stories of, like, people getting a bunch of day-olds at Panera and then just driving by a camp and throwing it out the window as they drive by. Like just disrespectful like ways of like showing support for people. Yeah, and one more slide, I think. If you're interested in this, there's a whole bunch. Yes. Can you go back one slide?
Council member.
Oh, council member. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Okay, one more slide. If you are interested in housing issues, there's a whole bunch of really good resources and books. So there's a book called Evicted by Matthew Desmond, The Color of Law, which talks about all of the bad policies that we've had in the past. There's the Louisville Redlining Project that'll show you Louisville's redlining map, and you can match up other social determinants of health like poverty rate, health outcomes, like lead exposure to like where places were redlined. There are a couple podcasts on the media, Scarlet E and You're Wrong About Homelessness. And these are all things that I encourage anybody, like anytime anybody starts on the organization with us, I have them listen and read these things because they are pretty like foundational pieces that help inform the work. And then one more slide. Any questions? Yeah.
The whole tent city, what kind of homelessness, is that a transitional?
I would call that transitional, like Hope
Okay.
Village, what Stachel's doing.
The blue tents?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would call
okay.
that more transitional, like they're in the mix, they're probably in, so anytime somebody comes into homelessness, they have to be assessed. And this is a way to triage resources and get them in the appropriate program. So it's a 16-question process where it's like, oh, you're a veteran, you should get this VASH voucher. VASH is Veterans Accessing Secure Housing or something. Or you're disabled, like let's get you in as quickly as possible. So the vulnerability like thing is just the key to getting into housing. So people that are at the tent village, Hope Village,
okay.
They've all been assessed, and it's just kind of waiting for a voucher to match up with them. And the other struggle right now, and this is indicative of our housing market, is like we have people with vouchers, so a slip of paper that says that HUD, Housing and Urban Development, will pay for your rent. They're still homeless. They just can't find a place to like that they can afford and get into.
On the two slides back, there's a trust fund.
Yeah.
How is that supported? Is
So-
that just donations?
So, I mean, they would take a donation. So the Louisville Metro, they created an affordable housing trust fund. So this is a pot of money that can help fund housing developments that are more affordable. Is anybody a developer here? Okay. So you won't know the difference of me just talking, making it up. Every time they do a development, they do a pro forma. So they figure out what they can charge, they can figure out how they're going to finance it, and the trust fund is there just to come in and bring like, we need $2 million more to make this project affordable and cash flow. So it's just there to kind of help subsidize housing development. The city spends about $10 million a year on it, just through general funds.
Okay, so it's funded through the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
Advice, because as we said, choices is
Yeah.
one way to say it, but how about guiding people on how to?
Yeah. So, I mean, this question comes up a lot. Where is it choices? Like how can we empower people to have more choices and make better choices? For me, a lot of people have never had a good choice. And my wife teaches at Marion C. Moore Middle School, and she has students that are not motivated by anything. Nothing that motivates. They're not motivated in the same way that I was motivated. They don't necessarily care about grades. They don't care about getting punished. They don't care about getting expelled. There's just a lack of, do I call it hope? There's just a lack of like anybody seeing a vision past what they're currently in. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't think that people actively choose to like not pay the rent. And I don't think that people actively choose to spend all their money one way or the other. I think that they're just stuck in a state of survival where it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like if you're always focused on trying to get housing and get food on the table, like you're not able to think beyond those two things. And do people make poor choices? Yeah, I make poor choices all the time. But just the fact that I grew up with secure housing, like my parents were able to focus on me, making sure that I was making good choices and I was making good moves, whereas other people didn't have that luxury, where if mom is working 2 jobs and dad got incarcerated, like what's my success gonna look like? So I think it's more complex than just like people making a bad choice, people making a good choice. I think it's more just the environment for people to have a good choice to make, because a lot of people get stuck with just choosing between 2 bad options. There's a book called The Other Wes Moore. He just won the primary in Maryland, but this guy grew up in Baltimore. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He was U.S. military. He had every opportunity, and he went home one time and he found this story about this other guy named Wes Moore who grew up maybe a block away from him, and he was serving a life sentence. And the whole book is about like, what are the choices that I got? What are the choices that he got? And the whole thing is like, I was given second chances. We're all given second chances. We just don't know when that last second chance is going to be. So, I mean, I hadn't thought about that book in a long time until I read the news yesterday. But it's good. It kind of just talks about like how it's almost a roll of dice for people sometimes. Yes, ma'am.
Words I didn't hear from you are drug use, and how critical do you feel drug use is in this greater scheme of things?
I mean, it's part of it. I don't think it's the driver of homelessness. I think what we see downtown, people have been sleeping out in downtown for a decade. It's just where they were camping, nobody paid attention to. What's happened downtown in the last 5 years? Louisville Soccer Stadium was a big camp. Probably 100 people stayed on that land. And it was just vacant land, it was overgrown, nobody knew it was there. Botanical Gardens came online. Again, vacant land, downtown, nobody was paying attention to it. So when those 2 developments came on, that's when really the soccer stadium, that's when you saw all the bridges get occupied. So it's there. Drug use is always an issue. I think we need multiple options for treatment. I think, but I don't think treatment should be a prerequisite for housing. So we operate on HUD, best practice, Housing and Urban Development's best practices, this housing first model of the best solution for somebody who's homeless and sleeping out is to get them into housing. And depending on their situation and circumstances, having a level of case management there, because they can't get a job while they're homeless, they can't deal with any kind of severe mental illness, they can't deal with any of their substance use disorder until they know, like, I know where I can be tonight. And then with a case manager dealing with all the things that they have going on. Yes, ma'am.
So just back one more time to EJ's question, because I think it's a really important one about choices. This kind of, to me, this brings us full circle to where we started with this series, which those of you who are here for Rick Axtell, the last Sunday of February, I don't remember that as well as I'd like to. maybe you can help me, but I remember he had up here we had two dry erase boards, and we listed, and I don't remember what the categories were called, if it was choice, not choice, or external, internal, something like that, and we listed what are the things basically that you can be in control of, and what are the things that you're not in control of. And so I know I'm going to go back. It's on the website, right? Yeah.
It's on our Matthew 25 page. This will be on that page as well, and this presentation will be on that page. But you can go back and watch Dr. Axtell on there. I think if not there, send us an email. We've got it. It may just not be public.
He addressed that as a foundational question, and it's part of everything we've talked about, really. Yeah.
And that's not the first time I've gotten asked that question. I mean, it is like this. I think it's, people think, it's a common, like, well, people are making bad choices, like, they have to live with them. And, like, I'm a firm believer, like, that some people just don't have good options to make the choice, so. Yeah, Caitlin.
Just kind of to add to that idea, so before I worked at the Coalition with George, I used to work at Educational Justice, and something we worked with 5th through 8th grade students, actually giving them tutoring services through high schoolers. And one of the first things that we would train the high schoolers on is the cycle of poverty, and how that can affect, like you're talking about, the choices that you have. So if you have your parents, let's say, live in the Highlands and they own their own home, you go to collegiate, you're going to be probably on the track to also become a homeowner and also send your kids to collegiate or a school like collegiate. But if you grow up in honestly any of the communities in the West End, maybe you're growing up in Parkland or in California, and your parents are renters, and their highest level of education is a high school degree or some college, then you are then, of course, more likely to also only have a degree or have finished high school and also become a renter. So this idea, like, just to reiterate what George is saying about choices, if this is what you're seeing from your parents, and this is all you know, it is very, very difficult to envision a world in which things are different. If this is all you know, this is what you assume is how everybody else lives. So it is possible to make different choices, but it is very, very difficult to do that without an immense amount of support from people, and from the government as well, than just having different laws and policies. So I just want to reiterate, I guess, the cycle of poverty that can affect people's choices that they have to make.
Any other comments, thoughts, reactions? Yeah.
So a lot of it is role models, especially in the inner city. People may not have the role models like you were talking about, their lifestyle and things like that. Poverty, but there was an article in the New York Times last week, I think it was last week, on homelessness. Mm-hmm. And it was a long article, but basically it said the biggest problem besides poverty is access to housing, just like what you've been talking about.
Yeah, that was the big, like, 25,000. Yeah, I need to catch up on some of those articles. And they're always long and really good. And sometimes they'll do the audio and I'll just put them in during a run so that I can multitask.
I'll add a comment. So I worked in homelessness in LA for a little bit, and one of the things that astounded me about homelessness is that every story is so different, and that it's so hard to generalize this is the answer, because every person is a person with a whole myriad of challenges and experiences that led them to that moment that might put them on the street or put them in a car or whatever. And that's what I find is one of the hardest things, is that every single person you encounter in that, something happened that got them there that is not the same as what you've experienced. And that makes it so difficult to come up with answers.
And it's, I mean, sometimes it's just bad luck, where, like, I'm just thinking, so as part of our work at the Coalition, we knocked on something like 7,000 doors of people that were due in eviction court. And just the stories that we would always pick up there would just be like, you did nothing wrong. Like, it's bad luck. Like, I'm thinking of this family right now who, they moved up here from Mississippi. He's a welder, so he was working at, like, he welds trailers together for, like, boats and just gardens. And he hurt his back, and his job won't lay him off. They're still keep him on staff. He just doesn't get any hours, but he's not getting any income because he's trying to figure out, like, can he get on disability? Like, he hurt his back, so he's waiting on surgery, he's waiting on disability claims, he's waiting on a whole bunch of things. But it's just, he's just kind of in this limbo, and unfortunately rent is due every month. And his wife is on disability. And so it's just this hard situation of, I can pay my LG&E this week, and then I can maybe, like, get together some of the rent money. It's just, people get stuck in survival mode when those things happen. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, George, especially for coming out. Let's close our time together with prayer and then be on our way. Let's pray. Holy One, we give you thanks for the opportunity to learn about your people and remember that they are people, that they all have a unique story and encounter with all your other children on this earth, and that each and every one of them is loved. Be with us and guide us as we move on in the world, hopefully empowered to do something, to learn more, to experience your people anew. And we give you thanks for the opportunity to do so. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you. And this will all be on the website.